Hi, we're here at Rex Moon's house at 515 County Route 10, Corinth, New York. Rex, I hear you were served in World War II. Would you like to?
I did indeed.
Would you like to give us a little info on like where you were in the war, your occupation, and we can go from there.
Well, I went in the service on an active basis in June of 43. Immediately went into basic training in Alabama in the middle of the summer, and it was a hot one. Then the Army decided to send me to college. I'd already had 3 years of college, but the Army said they needed engineers. So they sent me to Alabama, or an Alabama Polytechnic, which is now the University of Auburn, and spent 6 months there taking a lot of courses that I'd already had. But as luck would have it, they needed foot soldiers. So all of that came to an end in May, and by the next September I was in Europe getting ready to, or following up on the invasion, let's put it that way. I joined the 80th Division just out of the Cherbourg Peninsula, as it had just formulated its line of attack there, had been made part of the Third Army, which was headed up by George Patton. And from there, we hardly stopped until we got to Austria and met the Russians, and the 80th Division was the last unit in the Army to fire a shot. Our most distinguished action was when you read about the Third Army's famous diversion away from Salzburg, or from Saarburg and Metz, to go up and protect Luxembourg from the breakthrough, which was known as the Battle of the Bulge. My battalion was assigned a job, along with the 4th Armored Division, to rescue the 101st Division, which was, of course, surrounded at Bastogne. So we were the first foot soldiers into Bastogne to relieve the 101st. We then regrouped and proceeded through the Siegfried line, went across south-central Germany, because you remember the Americans left Berlin, or northern Germany, to the Russians. That was a deal that we had made way back. The Russians felt they were entitled to capture Berlin after the terrible things the Germans had done to them and attempt to invade them. So we ended up pretty much on the border between Austria and Czechoslovakia. And as I said, our division was the last one to fire a shot in World War II. I personally was taken out of my unit and sent up into the Alps to help form a recreation center. Because once the war ended, we had a lot of troops, and it didn't seem fair that they would have marching and close order drill every day. So various units would set up recreation centers for their divisions. And it was up there that I got hit by a truck. And we're now in the end of May, and I spent the rest of the May, June, July, August, September, October, and November until I got out in December in the hospital, recovering from 2 broken legs. And I got out of the service then. I went to graduate school. I finished at Union. Then I went to graduate school at the University of Maryland. I then became the admissions officer at Union College. Spent 5 years doing that. I then spent the next 15 years with the College Entrance Examination Board, running their financial aid program, and then spent the next 15 years in a consulting firm, telling other people how to do things better in the field of higher education. After which I retired and now live on this lovely lake in the southern Adirondacks.
Now, when you talk about the recreation centers, what do those consist of?
Well, we picked out, I'm sure other units, other divisions had them. Ours was in a town called Gmunden. It was up in the Alps. It had been a very popular summer resort for the British. It had, of all things, a brewery, and that's the first thing we got started. It had sailboats. It had a lovely beach. It had areas where you could play softball, touch football. It had good dining facilities that we were able to set up for units. It was a resort town. And a lot of the houses were empty, so we could use those as billets. So when the troops came up, it was a welcome change from the foxholes that they had to live in for the last 10 or 12 months. So they got reasonably good billets, good food, lots of chances for recreation, lots of chances to try real German beer, and this was real German beer. There were movies. We had all kinds of entertainment. We just had a little time off. And right there was a lot of efforts at that point to recruit. If you didn't know this, but you earned points by your service and the type of service you had, the length of time you'd been in. And if you had a certain number of points, and I forgot what they were now, you could go home. That, as far as anybody was concerned, the war was over. And if you had those points, if you didn't, well, let me put this, if you didn't have those points, you were probably going to go to Japan and fight the Japanese. And for those who had points, and I had plenty of points, there was a big effort to try to recruit you to stay in the military. By then I'd been a platoon sergeant, and so I had a lot of experience in leading units in combat, and it was something they wanted to be sure to have when they invaded Japan. I personally had no interest. I wanted to finish college and get on with my life. But before any of those final decisions were made, I was injured and spent the rest of the time in a hospital, got to fly home, and eventually got out.
Do you remember how you acquired those points?
Well, yeah. roughly speaking. It was based upon, first of all, your length of service, the nature of your service. In other words, for example, you see up there something called the Combat Infantry Badge, that little blue, that thing with a long bar on it, blue. That was worth a lot of points. That means you'd spent at least 3 months in continual combat contact with the enemy. And that was worth a lot of points. So I think it was essentially a length of service and whether you'd been in combat or not. I don't remember specifically how the point system worked, but I don't remember it. I was happy to realize I had enough.
When you were in the Battle of the Bulge, it's known that it was the coldest winter in many years.
Yeah, it was.
France. How would you describe it?
How would I describe it?
Yeah.
Well, it was colder than this winter. Well, I'll tell you, it was so damn cold, and excuse the ladies who are going to witness this, but in those days, men's pants didn't have zippers. They had buttons. So that if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to unbutton your pants, and your hands could be so cold you couldn't unbutton your pants. That's cold. The Army, they did the best they could, I suppose, with the stuff we had to work with. Feet were a terrible problem. I was eventually able, you can see in that picture, I was eventually able to get you can have that picture, you can take it with you. I was eventually able to get a pair of shoe packs. And those are the same as LL Bean boots. You know the LL Bean boots? Well, they're not the greatest because in those days they didn't know anything about tinselate or insulating things like that. The theory was you just put on enough socks. But that, damn, try as you will, that wasn't too good. Now you see in that picture some of the other guys have leather shoes on. This famous leather combat boot that was developed for World War II was not a great shoe by any means. It had a high cuff around the top, which was supposed to act like puttees, but didn't keep your feet warm. And it was leather, and it wasn't waterproof, and it could get wet, and it would. One of the biggest injuries that was chronic in the service in Europe was something called trench foot. And it was just the fact that your foot was cold and wet most of the time. There was a secret that we all learned very early was whenever you got a chance to get another pair of socks, and every once in a while they would come around and say, well, we got some more socks. Well, keep the ones you had, because the more socks you had, the better off you were. And the socks that you were trying to dry, how do you think we dried our socks?
Put them underneath your clothing, or...
Yeah, that's right. We used to hang them on our belts with one section inside the pants, the foot section inside the pants and the top section hanging out. And as long as you had your jacket down over them, they'd eventually dry. And so if you had 2 or 3 pairs, you'd keep changing your socks all the time, and that diverted, because when you're living in a foxhole and you're expecting visitation by the enemy, you don't take your shoes off. Your shoes are on most of the time, 24 hours a day. And so if you can get an extra pair or two of socks, you're well ahead of the game. And long underwear was very definitely part of it. Yeah, I'm sure that actually, but considering all the experience we had had in World War I, fighting also in Europe and in that area of Europe, we should have had better. We should have had better equipment. We were still wearing the same type of wool pants that they wore in World War I. They still, we all started out with these great big long overcoats. You ever seen an old army overcoat?
I think I have, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I still have mine, but they were wonderful warm coats. They were the best wool in the world. The only trouble is they trying to run in them. So you know the first thing we did?
Cut them down.
They cut them off. And you made jackets just about the length of the jacket that I have on there. That's not an old coat cut off, but that's what you'd do. You'd cut those coats off. So when first guys would first join a unit, you'd always find laying all over the ground. Because first thing the old hands would say to you, you better cut that damn coat down.
Did you
So
ever,
the weather conditions were, in simple terms, they were miserable because you're outdoors all day long, and only after a while as you get into less combative situations or where you're chasing the enemy all the time and he's not trying to chase you, you're outdoors. And you're outdoors 24 hours a day. But once in a while you get a break. You eliminate it, you capture a town, and you crawl into the cellars of houses. But remember, so many of those little villages in Europe at that time, people were poor to start with. They didn't have a great many things. Anyway, they were sleeping, a lot of them on straw. I remember we used to say the real sign, especially when we got over into the Alps and Saar region, over area between France and Germany. The sure sign of wealth, and this sounds pretty awful, and it was how high the manure pile was around your well. Boy, you never drank that water. How those people, they must have built up terrible, fantastic resistance. But they would pile, you see, manure has heat in it, so it would keep the well from freezing. They'd pile manure up around the well so it didn't freeze in the winter. Yeah.
in your time that you spent in the Battle of the Bulge, did you personally have any encounters with the enemy?
Did I personally have any encounters with the enemy?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I had personal encounters with the enemy. Sure. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to talk about or describe?
Did I talk with them?
No, like any of your.
Well, I got the Silver Star for capturing a roadblock that the Germans had set up to destroy tanks, and that meant I captured a substantial number of Germans. And, I knew a little bit of German, but most of the things you did with them was simply to get their hands up or put their guns down or turn around and start moving or things like that. So I never had to bayonet one, thank God. That's really a close encounter.
Yeah, that's more a lot of lands where they ran into in Japan.
Yeah, well, we didn't do a lot of bayoneting in Europe. I don't know how much bayoneting they did in the South Pacific. The movies have a lot of bayoneting. The bayonet was very useful in opening cans, packages, K-rations. I think a couple of times the rumors were that we were going to have certain attacks. We better put our bayonets on and be ready. And yeah, we put them on, but didn't have to use them. One of the great things about the Third Army was we never stopped. We were always going forward. Our division was called Patton's Troubleshooters. And at the time, it seemed like we were getting all the dirty jobs. After the war over, of course, you had all the glory. But while you were performing it seemed like a pretty nasty job. And I was lucky. I never got wounded. Knock on wood. So.
Did you ever, you or any of your close buddies kill any Germans? Or was it mostly capturing?
Yeah. But you know what? The nature of the attack was such you didn't know. When I first joined the 80th, I was what was called a BAR man. That was something in those days known as the Browning automatic rifle, which was a 20-round semi-automatic machine gun in a sense, because it had all the capabilities of firing 20 rounds from a clip. I've forgotten how many seconds. And it was heavy. But the attack strategy that was often used was you come out of the woods and everybody would be firing their guns at a would-be enemy over there in the woods somewhere that you were trying to get through. And did you hit somebody? You probably scared them if you didn't hit them. Well, you wouldn't stop. I mean, you kept going because you had a certain objective that you were supposed to reach. Did I see dead Germans? Oh yeah, I saw a lot of dead Germans. Did we kill them? Well, somebody did. But you're running across a field like the field outside there, and you're firing at least two or maybe three clips of 20 rounds each out of your gun before it one side to the other. Probably hit something. Maybe the victim, maybe they died of splinters from the trees and nothing else. No, the guys who count casualties are called grave registration. When you're in active combat, you don't count casualties. You just keep moving. And somebody else's job is to take care of the wounded and treat and clear up the battlefield. But if you're in the infantry, you're supposed to keep moving. I don't know how many people were killed. I know that we're staggering. I think it's something in the neighborhood of 600,000 Americans were killed in World War II altogether.
Yes.
But that includes the Pacific as well as Europe. I think that includes. and of course untold numbers were wounded in some fashion or another, and I wasn't, thank God.
How long were you in the 3rd Division together?
What?
How long were you in the 3rd Division?
Well, from September of 43. No, September of 44. September of 44. Until I was discharged. I was considered part of the 8th Division. But I was injured on the 22nd of May in 45, so I was in the hospital after that. But I was discharged as a member of Company G, 318th Infantry in the 30th Division, or 80th Division.
Are there any war stories that were timely told? And
I was never great on war stories. I really never war stories. You know, when so many of us, when we got out of the service in World War II, there seemed to be a unanimous effort on everybody's part to get on. You see now you take this present force in Iraq. They got these guys that are 40 and 45 and 50 years of age in that they pick up these reservists. I think we had one guy in our whole company that was 39 years old, and we used to call him Pop and Old Man. And we were all young. Everybody was young. And we hadn't done anything in life yet. We didn't have jobs. We hadn't finished our education. So when most of us got out, we just headed for something, school. An awful lot, because of the GI Bill, an awful lot of people got some kind of further education. I went all the way through, got enough courses to get a doctorate actually, but I only got a master's, and I immediately went into college admissions work, even though I was trained as an industrial psychologist. I never practiced industrial psychology. I practiced regular psychology on my family all the time, but not as an industrial psychologist. But no, my point being, our generation wasn't sitting around telling stories. You see, the whole country was involved in World War II. The whole country. The whole world was, in fact, but it isn't like these things that we've done since then, where people come home from the service and they're, in a sense, kind of isolated because people don't, I don't know, where have you been, sort of thing. But when we came back from the service, we all had objectives that we wanted to accomplish. We didn't have time to sit around. We didn't want to sit around. Now, maybe the American Legion did. I didn't join the American Legion until about 5 years ago. And maybe those guys sat around and told war stories. Everybody has war stories. They don't have to be combat stories. Everybody's had experiences that are unusual and would never have again in any other way. Whether it was standing in line waiting to get your shot for some kind of disease in a raincoat, stark naked in a raincoat in 110-degree temperature in the sun in Alabama. Well, that's a war story, I'll tell you. You've never, and they didn't have what they called breathing raincoats. They were rubber raincoats. And you should have had a bar of soap underneath there. You could have taken a shower. So there were war stories. War stories, many of them were as funny as they were horrible or sad. I think probably most of the war stories people told as funny experiences. Yeah, one of my favorite war stories was the few days that we occupied Wiesbaden, Germany. It's on the western side of Germany. It was a location of Hermann Göring's Hinkel champagne factory. Before he joined Hitler, he was a champagne salesman. And we liberated a champagne factory, or a champagne distillery. Now, if you can imagine what that's like, you can try. But as I remember writing home to my wife, we're doing everything with champagne here. We're washing, we're cleaning our teeth, and we're even drinking some of it. Liberating wine cellars was not an unusual accomplishment once we got in Germany. Now, the French, who are the originators of French wine, as having been occupied, the Germans took all the wine away from them, took them over to Germany. So after we got to Germany is where you really found the wine. The French especially in the what would be the western side of France, where apples are grown profusely. Hey, Prince had a wonderful beverage called Calvados, which is an apple, not an apple wine, it's an apple liquor. It's distilled apple juice. And it's clear, it's somewhat like a vodka or a gin. And that's what the French could do very readily, very easily, and it was quite abundant. But most of the good wine had been taken into Germany, and once we got in there, we were able to liberate a lot of it. It never got anyplace. It stayed right home. That was the first thing. You see, if you're in the infantry, you're the first guys in. And while looting was not a big specialty, if you found a few eggs someplace, or a live chicken, or, oh, there were stories about banks. But you see, the German mark wasn't worth a nickel, especially in the hands of the Americans. We were paid regularly with what's called a script, I guess. It was little pieces like that. It had value to it. It had numbers on it. But what do you buy with it? Well, you could buy extra. Used to get, you were issued. There was a regular tobacco ration. And if you were a cigar smoker, you could, I think everybody was entitled to the same ration. It was something like, let's say 20 cigarettes or 40 cigarettes and 2 cigars and a package of pipe tobacco. Well, I was a pipe smoker, so I was able to trade off my cigarettes and my cigars for pipe tobacco, and guys who wanted cigars could trade off their other stuff. So you had a little barter system going. Seemed to me we used to get candy bars, but I can't remember that for sure. But we had food. Our food was often, well, it came in 2 forms. And remember, I'm speaking now for units that were in the field all the time, sleeping in holes and stuff like that. Our company was blessed, as many were, with a mess sergeant who believed that the troops should have at least 1 hot meal a day. And he would go, he'd go through hell and high water to make sure we got whatever meal he planned to be a hot meal. And it was never lunch. It was either dinner or breakfast. And breakfast was served early. But he'd show up. First thing he might have pancakes and oatmeal and ice cream. He'd have ice cream. Now, the way he made this ice cream, he would, I think my wife will get that. He would make it in a big garbage can. And he'd fill that with snow. He would then, he'd then put in 10 pounds of sugar. And whatever canned fruit he had around, he'd dump that in, and then they'd stir this all up, and it would freeze overnight. And then the next morning, everybody's standing around shivering, eating their cold pancakes and their cold oatmeal. And guess what? Well, we got mixed fruit ice cream today. But then if, remember when we got, I don't think we ever had a Thanksgiving dinner, but the day we headed, our battalion headed in to rescue Bastogne was Christmas Day. We started off early in the morning on Christmas Day. And 4 days later, we got to Bastogne and broke the German lines into there so that supplies could come into the 101st. And, must have been maybe a dozen of us had gotten together. We'd found a cellar in the house, and we were building a fire in there because one of the guys had found a chicken, and we're going to have a little chicken supper. I don't know what we were cooking. If we'd found a pan in the house or something. And guy comes stomping down the stairs. He said, "Christmas dinner's here, Christmas dinner's here." And the mess sergeant had come in, and he had saved, he obviously knew he wasn't going to serve Christmas dinner. He'd saved it, and we had Christmas dinner 4 days later, for rather late in the evening. He'd found us, so we got our hot meal that day. There was an awful lot of ingenuity. Ingenuity is part of the success of any military operation. I think we had good commanders. I don't think it was it was not run as a political war. So many of our wars since then have been run as political wars. And the politicians are,
Hi.
the politicians are the ones who call the important shots. And that doesn't make for... Hey, Prince! You're following up the movie here.
So this would be your war bride? Your war
This
bride?
is my war bride, yeah.
This is the war bride.
She's the war bride. This is
Yeah.
Pinky, yeah.
63 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, the Pinky.
Yeah, I've seen you before.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi.
He's a guard at the High.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I had no idea you were related. Though.
No, I didn't either.
No. No. That's great.
This is his grandson, Sean Morrow.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to see you. You don't need a picture of me.
So how often were you able to write to your wife or contact her?
Oh, well, there were lots of times there wasn't enough light by the time you start at the end of the day. Well, you can pretty much write. I wouldn't say every day you could do that. They facilitated military correspondence with something called
Email.
Was it, or V-mail? What is it?
V-mail.
V-mail.
Not
V-
this big.
V stood for victory. And it was a self-contained unit. It started out about this big. It wasn't full 8.5 by 11. And you had the writing space on it. Then you folded it over. You didn't have to put a stamp on it. Then it was sent someplace, and they made a photostat of it. And they shrunk it down to about that big. Isn't that about the size?
Yeah. The truth is that he mostly, instead of writing, he drew pictures of surrounding countryside, which I've been trying to find ever since I got here.
They're around somewhere. Yeah, I didn't.
He wrote very little. He just simply.
When I was in the States, I used to, one
Yeah.
of the things you did, you wrote almost every night. But when, well, first of all, your fountain pen freezes. They didn't have I don't think they had ballpoint pens in those days. I don't remember ballpoint pens.
I don't know.
They would have frozen also. So writing was not a regular activity. Getting mail was not a regular activity. Though there were valiant efforts to try to deliver mail or to deliver packages of cookies. And of course the most famous stuff was many of the soldiers apparently came from families where salami was a popular dish. And if a salami has been coming to somebody in the mail for about 4 months, it's a kind of messy, green cookie. You can smell it a mile away. So those 2 and 3 month old salamis, they got through once in a while. But life in, these guys today in Iraq, they live in the green zone, and they take showers every day, and they watch TV, and
They email home.
yeah, or they talk to their families on television or on cell phones. I suppose now if we had World War III, all soldiers will carry cell phones probably, and they'll talk to each other and between their tanks or their trenches or whatever they are, and they'll call home whenever they feel like it. But we didn't have any of that technology.
Notice that you have your hat right here.
That's my American Legion hat.
Well, are those the same as those?
Some of them.
Would you like to explain how
There are
that-
two rows of these, okay? The top row of these are of the metal that you see up there. The bottom row are what you call commemorative medals, which are designed to wear on hats. And they commemorate certain activities or events or represent certain types of service or medals that you might have received. They just look pretty on a hat. But those are the real thing up there. And those, see, there's my rank, here's my division, here's my proficiency in weapons and infantry.
I got it.
The medals that are up there, do you remember how you got them, or like you remember what they're for?
Yeah, well, the highest one there is the furthest to the left, and then they go down from there. The first two are awarded for heroism or valor or gallantry. The next one is for the battle, what we used to call the Battle of the United States. He got that for being in the service. The next one was for Europe, and that has 4 stars on it, the green one. That means that my service consisted of what were called 4 separate battles. There was the Battle of Normandy, there was the Battle of Central France, there was the Battle of the Ardennes, which was also the Battle of the Bulge, and then the Battle of Germany. And that's what those 4 stars on there represent. The next one is called Victory, the Victory Medal. And the last one in that row is service in the occupation of Germany. Now the little medal up on the right-hand side is a good conduct medal. The original requirement for a good conduct medal was you had to be in the service, I think it was 3 years, and have had good conduct, right? I would not have been normally qualified. So a year or so ago, I wrote to the military and I said, here's my record, here's what I did, here's how long I served, here's where I was. Am I eligible for good conduct medal? And they sent me a good conduct medal. Okay? The medal on the left was given by the state of New York, and I forget what they call it, some kind of a cross. Well, the main reason I got that is because I had the combat infantry badge, which you received if you were in combat contact with the enemy for 3 months. Okay? That's the only way you could get the combat infantry badge, had to be in combat. Now, the bottom, the medal on the bottom, the blue, little blue thing with a gold around it, that's called a Presidential Unit Citation. And in some respects, that's the highest honor I have. That was given to our company for its performance in the relief of Bastogne, or for the rescue of Bastogne. And that's given to a unit that performs, and the definition of the award is a unit in which the performance of each individual is the level of the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest medal America can give. So in a sense, it's a group award for unusual service in a combat situation. And in some ways, it's the highest award I have there, even though it looks like it's a Silver Star. And that's I'm very proud of that award because of that most unusual circumstance. Now the one down in the bottom is called the Senate Liberty Award, and that was given by New York State Senate. They had these were done a number of years ago. These were both the cross and the gold medallion were something that the politicians came up with to recognize World War II service, which, what did Tom Brokaw call us? The greatest generation or something?
Oh, the greatest generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is the politicians. Good for them. We didn't get any reduction on our taxes.
Out of your experiences that you had in the war, was there any battle that stuck out to you that was more important than the other, or do you think they all were along the same importance to?
That's an interesting question. I suppose I guess from the point of view of urgency, the relief of Bastogne maybe was most important. And as I say, for that we got a presidential citation, but I remember crossing the Rhine River was considered to be a pretty important affair, because when you think about it, that was really the first time that we were really on the ground of the enemy. And we, as the Germans had discovered with the Maginot Line, do you know what the Maginot Line was?
No, I don't.
Well,
Is that like the Siegfried line?
huh?
Is it like the Siegfried line?
Well, the Germans built the Siegfried Line, the French built the Maginot Line. And as the Germans found the Maginot Line, you didn't have to go through it, you went around it. We found that the penetration of the Siegfried Line was not a big deal. Parts of places you could get around it, other places you could confront it. And actually, by the time we got to Germany, the Germans, the ordinary German, and the ordinary German in the military was beginning to learn how to run backwards. They had been wiped out in France. I mean, they had put up a pretty stiff resistance in France, because holding France was the way they kept people out of Germany. And they never dreamt that we would get to Germany. And they were disheartened, to say the least. And, you know, you ran into token resistance here and there, and people were still getting killed, but it was just a matter of a few. I mean, the real tough battle was from the day we landed on the 7th of June till Christmas. When the Germans, remember, that's when the Bulge.
Yes.
Right around Christmas. Right up until then, 1st of January. The Germans were very, very resistant.
So you got there the day after D-Day?
Beg pardon?
So you got you were in the Battle of the Bulge the day after D-Day? Or you were in active service?
Well, I was in the Battle of the Bulge in the sense that I penetrated the Bulge.
Yes.
The Bulge had two aspects. You got run over and pushing them back. I was involved in pushing them back. You see, Bastogne was a key point. The Bulge surrounded Bastogne. And every place else the Germans had overrun the Americans, except the 101st Airborne Division, 101st Division, 15,000 guys, or a lot less because no division was full enough. But let's say 10,000 guys were in that little pocket, and they were supposedly good fighters. So rescuing them became an important venture. George Patton was, remember, the Third Army was going across, and we were going to cross through Mainz and Salzburg, or not Salzburg, but Strasbourg, and then into the Siegfried line when the Bulge occurred. And it was at that point that the Third Army made a complete turn in direction and went up into Luxembourg to protect Luxembourg City from the Bulge. The Bulge never got Luxembourg City because the Third Army had sent units up there, including the 80th Division, and then we were picked off and sent further on up to the Belgian border in preparation for the invasion, or in the effort to relieve the 101st Airborne. And you'll see that, if you watch the movie Patton, you'll get it from the, it's DVD or on a disc, either way. You get it either way you want, I'm sure. Or that's DVD, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Whatever the other way is. It's a fairly old movie. It's been out for. Watch it. You'll see the kind of that was my experience. That part of that movie that deals with the Battle of the Bulge and the movement across Europe. And Patton was the ultimate commander of my army. And I saw Patton a couple of times. He was all blood and guts. He'd come down through the line, shouting and hollering, and everybody'd say hi, General. So,
Was he a big motivator for the people?
Sure, yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Watch the movie. I mean, it's a good movie. And if this subject is something that you have an interest in, it's well done. And it does pick, and he had some bad points. There was no question about it. He was constantly speaking out, and he'd struck a soldier one time.
Yeah, and that caused for his removal, right?
Beg pardon?
Didn't that caused for his removal?
Yeah. Well, he was never removed. He was asked to apologize. He
So,
but it's a very, now they say this brothers. Band of Brothers.
Yes.
I just happened to catch that. I said, that's the Band of Brothers? That's the 101st Airborne again. They all looked like they were just dressed up for the movies. They look too much like movie stars and not very much.
Do you remember where you were on Pearl Harbor when it happened?
Yes, I knew exactly where I was. I'm not sure I should tell you, but I was in, when I first heard about Pearl Harbor, it was on a Sunday, and I was in the Colonial Tavern in the middle of downtown Saratoga. And I'm sure I had a date with a Skidmore girl. It was about 6 o'clock at night. That's the first time I heard about it. Now, people had probably heard about it sooner, but I was then a student in college, and you didn't hear about those things too readily, especially on a Sunday if you were driving back and forth between Schenectady and Saratoga. But I remember sitting there, and they suddenly announced this over the radio. And what effect did it have? Well, not an awful lot of effect. Until students started to enlist. I was in college, and every time a member of my fraternity, and they were all enlisting in the Air Force. That was the big thing, enlist in the Air Force, which was then run by the Army, actually. But every time somebody left, we'd have a big going away party. And that's, I guess, really what, for people in college at that point in time, people in college were being deferred, were being told, you're not going to have to go. You know, we need college people. War isn't going to last too long. And so, in a sense, this is terrible to say, but the early part of the war was just one big celebration after another. Until I remember somebody from my fraternity who had been killed. And boy, that suddenly brought everybody up. Here's a guy you knew, he'd been killed. And then they came through and said, if you will join the Enlisted Reserve Corps, ERC, you will be able to graduate. And I was I was just a sophomore, so that seemed like a pretty good deal, so I was going to be able to graduate. And the celebrations went on. The guys were leaving all the time. There's, you know, not in vast numbers. Next week, somebody else is leaving, so we got to have a party. And if you had friends in other fraternities, they had people leaving too. So you could go to a party all the time for people leaving the college. And then, of course, the news began to drift in of people being killed. And it was an awful shocker, because they were people you knew. And then the word went around, those of you in the enlisted reserve corps are going to go. You're not going to finish college. And we probably learned that by April, and we were all gone by June. It was a mass exodus then. If you were a medical student, if you were a pre-med, you went directly to medical school. And whether you had 2 years or 3 years of college, that's all. Boom. Off to medical school. And I think there were about 15, 16 guys in my class who were in that category. Maybe more. But, well, probably more because, anyhow, it's not important. But then there were a lot of us in the enlisted reserve corps. And by June of 43, most colleges in America had closed, or in a sense, closed as regular academic institutions. Male colleges, not so much for female colleges. Male colleges were just emptied. And the military took them over. For example, the military Navy took over Union College. And they had things like V12 and V5 and V this and V that. And it depends. If you were training to be a naval aviator, you'd be a V5. And if you were training to be a deck officer, you'd be a V12. And they had all these different things. So the colleges kept going, but they were being run and paid for by the Navy.
Rex, my female college, also had trained the waves there.
They had wave, Mount Holyoke had a wave unit.
Yeah, because they lost students too.
Oh, sure.
Now, the people that are in this picture, did you know them before you got to the war, or was
Did I know I am? No.
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 So they were. So
They didn't know me, I didn't know them.
How long were all four of you together? Well, the four of you together.
How long? Well, I can't remember exactly. My guess is we were all what they called replacements. A replacement was somebody who got put into a unit, generally in combat, a unit which was already in combat, because of the loss of personnel. And after we, after I finished that ASTP program, I got thrown into a training division in the United States, and then they started picking people out of that, sending them overseas, in not just one or two, but maybe a dozen, 2 dozen. And it was kind of I don't know how I happened to end up in the 80th Division. But I got put in there as a replacement.
So it was kind of like luck of the draw. Like you could have been placed anywhere.
That's right. I might have ended up in, probably wouldn't have ended up in the 101st or the 82nd because I didn't have any parachute experience. But
Air Force.
I was destined to be cannon fodder. And you see, when you come down to it, virtually, I would guess, a unit, like a division, that originally had 15,000 men when they started out, certainly didn't end the war with 15,000.
Oh yeah.
somewhat less. How many of the original were still in the unit? Oh boy,
Few.
not very many. I mean, when we got to Austria, when the 8th Division got to Austria, I'd be inclined to say that not more than 10% of them were the same people that got off the boat when they first came to France. I wasn't one of them. I came along and got stuck in later. I got stuck in around end of September. They'd already been in Europe been there for a month, roughly. I don't know, I've never heard a number on something like that. But we had new people coming into our company and into my platoon all the time. It was just constantly new people coming in, new people coming in. Not very well trained either. Younger and younger. And then there's once in a while somebody who was 39 years old. But none of this stuff like they have over there now. That's ridiculous.
Is there anything you would like to ask, Rex? I want to say thank you for the interview.
You're entirely
It
welcome.
was very nice.
If you think of any more questions, come on back.
All right.
We can do a phone interview.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Um,
That's a form of technology.